You feel stuck because you're lying to yourself. That's the opening truth. You tell yourself you're trying, you tell yourself you're working, you tell yourself you're on the path, but nothing moves, no progress, no power, no momentum. And deep down, you already know why. Trying is what weak men do to feel productive without risking their identity. Trying is comfort disguised as effort. The world doesn't reward effort. It rewards transformation. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. You don't feel stuck because life is hard. You feel stuck because your internal language is weak. Not the words you say out loud, the language that runs in your head. That internal voice that negotiates, excuses, delays, and begs. You think in a broken dialect of fear and habit. And as long as you speak that language internally, your life will never change externally. People hear speaking in tongues and think religion, mysticism, nonsense. Wrong. Strip the weakness out of it and look at the mechanism. Speaking in tongues is about bypassing the old operating system. It's about shutting down the logical, scared, overtrained voice that keeps you small and forcing a new pattern to take control. It's not prayer. It's not emotion. It's dominance over your own mind. It's proof that language shapes identity and identity shapes action. You're stuck because you still think like the man you're trying to escape. Same vocabulary, same reactions, same emotional triggers, same internal negotiations. You can't build a new life while speaking the language of your old self. That's like trying to win a war using the enemy's codebook. Impossible. Real transformation starts when the old voice dies and a new one takes command, not politely, violently. Discipline is the enforcement arm of that new language. Discipline is when the voice doesn't ask how you feel. It tells you what happens next. Control is when emotion no longer has voting rights. Identity shift is when your internal dialogue stops sounding human and starts sounding inevitable. Calm, direct, unarguable, that's power, that's dominance. That's when momentum starts obeying you. Most men will never experience this because it requires ego death. It requires admitting that the version of you that got you here is unqualified to take you further. Weak men protect their current identity. Strong men destroy it without hesitation. When the internal language changes, behavior follows automatically. No motivation needed, no hype required. The system runs itself. You feel stuck because the voice inside your head is not built to win. It was trained for safety, comfort, and social approval, not dominance or forward motion. That voice hesitates, explains, and softens reality so you don't have to confront your own lack of control. Every delay, every half decision, every moment where you almost act comes from that same internal weakness. You're not trapped by circumstances. You're trapped by the way you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. Most men don't realize this because the internal voice feels like truth. It sounds reasonable. It sounds logical. It tells you to wait, to prepare more, to gather information, to be careful. But logic without urgency is paralysis. Reason without authority is useless. That voice doesn't push you forward. It keeps you stable, predictable, and harmless. Stability feels mature, but in reality, it's just fear dressed up as intelligence. Pay attention to how that voice operates. It doesn't command, it negotiates. It asks how you feel. It considers options. It gives you escape routes before you even start. That's not thinking. That's self-sabotage with good grammar. Powerful men don't ask their mind for permission. They issue instructions. When your internal language is full of maybes, laters, and what-ifs, your actions mirror that weakness perfectly. This is why effort alone never changes anything. You can work hard for years and still feel stuck if the internal language never evolves. You can read books, watch videos, and consume endless information, but if your self-talk remains passive, you'll stay in the same mental position. The mind is a command center. If the commands are weak, the system produces weak results. No exception. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men avoid. The voice in your head was shaped by past failures, social conditioning, and low standards. It learned to protect you from embarrassment, rejection, and discomfort. But protection and progress are opposites. The same internal voice that kept you safe is now the reason you're stagnant. It was useful once. Now it's obsolete. Notice how that voice reacts when pressure appears. It doesn't rise. It shrinks. It looks for explanations instead of solutions. It turns challenges into threats and responsibility into burden. That's why you freeze when opportunities appear. That's why you hesitate when decisions matter. The language inside you isn't designed for execution. It's designed for survival. High-level change only happens when the internal language shifts from emotional to directive, from descriptive to commanding, from explaining to enforcing. Until then, your actions will always leak power. You'll start things and stop early. You'll feel busy but achieve nothing. You'll confuse motion with momentum and call it progress. This is also why motivation never lasts. Motivation talks. Authority acts. Motivation pumps you up for a moment. Authority rewires behavior permanently. And authority begins with how you speak internally. When the voice stops comforting and starts commanding, behavior follows without resistance. Most men never change because they're too attached to the voice they recognize. It feels like them. Letting it go feels like losing identity. But the reality is harsher. Keeping it guarantees mediocrity. The internal language must evolve or you remain stuck, no matter how hard you push. If you want movement, the first battle isn't external. It's internal and linguistic. The moment the voice inside you stops negotiating and starts issuing orders, hesitation disappears. The mind stops debating. The body moves. Progress stops being optional and starts becoming automatic. Most men hide behind the word trying because it gives them an escape hatch. It sounds respectable. It sounds responsible. It allows failure without accountability. When you say you're trying, you're announcing that success is optional and comfort is still in control. That single word quietly lowers the standard and protects the ego from the pain of full commitment. Nothing powerful is ever built in the space between effort and hesitation. Trying is not action. Trying is rehearsal without a performance. It's movement without risk, energy without consequence. A man who is trying hasn't decided who he is yet, and undecided men never win. Decision creates identity. Identity creates behavior. Behavior creates results. Trying skips the decision and wonders why nothing changes. The moment you say you're trying, you've already given yourself permission to stop. You've planted failure into the sentence before the outcome even appears. That's why trying feels exhausting and unrewarding. You're carrying effort without conviction. You're burning energy while still mentally preparing to retreat. The body feels the conflict and progress stalls. Look at how trying operates in real life. You try to wake up early. You try to stay disciplined. You try to focus. Each attempt is conditional. It depends on mood, energy, and circumstances. That's not commitment. That's gambling with yourself. Strong men don't gamble with identity. They define it and enforce it. Trying keeps you emotionally attached to the old version of yourself. It lets you pretend you're changing while staying familiar. You keep the same habits, the same reactions, the same excuses, but now you call it a journey. That's not growth. That's delay with better branding. Real change begins the moment the old version of you is no longer allowed to speak. Not consulted, not debated with, silenced. As long as that old identity has a vote, it will always vote for comfort. It will always argue for rest, patience, and balance when pressure is required. That voice doesn't want to die, and that's exactly why it must. Identity change is violent. It's not gradual. It doesn't ask permission. The man you want to become replaces the man you are, not negotiates with him. Trying is what happens when you attempt to merge two incompatible identities into one life. One wants progress. The other wants safety. Safety always wins unless it's eliminated. This is why people stay stuck for years despite effort. They try to add discipline without removing weakness. They try to build confidence on top of insecurity. They try to act powerful while still thinking like a victim. That structure collapses every time. You can't upgrade software while the old program is still running. The truth is uncomfortable. Most men are more loyal to their excuses than their potential. Trying keeps those excuses alive. It gives them oxygen. It allows you to say you're not there yet, not ready, still learning. Meanwhile, time moves forward without mercy. Commitment doesn't feel inspirational. It feels restrictive. It removes options. It corners you into action. That's why weak men avoid it and call it unhealthy. But restriction is what creates focus, and focus is what creates momentum. When there is no exit, effort turns into execution. The fastest way out of stagnation is not more effort. It's finality. Decide who you are and act accordingly, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Trying keeps you comfortable in the middle. Decision forces you forward. And forward is the only direction where power exists. Control never begins with action. It begins with silence. The silence that comes when the old internal voice is no longer allowed to narrate your life. Most men think change starts with doing more, moving faster, pushing harder. That's why they fail. As long as the same internal language is running, every action you take will collapse back into old patterns. Behavior is downstream from identity, and identity is shaped by the voice you obey. The old internal language is subtle, but it's destructive. It sounds familiar. It sounds like reason. It explains why today is not the day, why the timing isn't right, why you deserve rest before you deserve progress. That voice isn't malicious, it's protective. And protection is the enemy of control. You can't dominate your life while something inside you is constantly negotiating for comfort. Killing the old internal language doesn't mean positive thinking. That's weak. It means removing commentary altogether. No debate, no emotional analysis, no self-pity dressed up as self-awareness. Orders replace opinions. Instructions replace feelings. When the mind stops narrating and starts commanding, something shifts immediately. Resistance drops. Action becomes clean. This is where most men panic. Without the familiar internal chatter, they feel exposed, empty, uncertain. They mistake that feeling for danger when in reality it's freedom. The old voice was never guidance, it was noise. And noise keeps you reactive. Silence creates control. Once the old language is gone, identity begins to reshape itself automatically. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries, hopes, and plans. You start seeing yourself as someone who executes. Not because you feel confident, but because the system demands it. Confidence follows action, not the other way around. Waiting to feel ready is another trick of the old voice trying to survive. Every real identity shift feels uncomfortable at first because it removes emotional padding. You stop explaining yourself internally. You stop justifying behavior. You stop rehearsing failure. That absence feels harsh, but harshness is clarity. Clarity is power. Power comes from knowing exactly what happens next without discussion. Men who achieve dominance in any domain don't have louder motivation. They have quieter minds. Their internal language is minimal, precise, and ruthless. Eat, train, work, improve, rest, repeat. No commentary, no drama, no internal storytelling, and just execution loops. This is why discipline becomes effortless once the identity shifts. Discipline fails when it's enforced on a mind that still believes it has options. When the old language dies, options disappear. You don't wake up deciding whether to act. You wake up knowing what happens. That certainty removes friction. Most men never reach this stage because they're addicted to internal conversation. They enjoy thinking about change more than becoming different. They mistake awareness for progress. They confuse understanding with execution. The old voice loves this because it keeps control while pretending to surrender it. When the internal language shifts, behavior stops being a battle. There's no internal war because there are no opposing sides anymore. The old self is gone. The new one doesn't argue, it moves. And movement, repeated daily, compounds into power faster than any external advantage. This is not about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming directed. Emotions still exist, but they don't drive. They follow. Control is not suppression. It's hierarchy. And when the hierarchy is correct, identity solidifies, actions align, and progress stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like inevitability. Most men misunderstand discipline because they were taught to see it as a habit, something you try to build slowly, something that depends on motivation, mood, or inspiration. That belief alone guarantees failure. Habits bend under pressure, authority does not. Discipline only works when it operates like command, not suggestion. The moment discipline asks how you feel, it loses. Feelings are unstable. Authority is not. When discipline is treated as a habit, it becomes conditional. You do the work when energy is high. You skip when stress appears. You perform when it's convenient and retreat when it's uncomfortable. That's not discipline. That's cooperation with circumstances. A man who cooperates with circumstances will always be controlled by them. Real discipline is cold. It doesn't care about enthusiasm or resistance. It doesn't argue with fatigue or negotiate with excuses. It issues instructions and expects compliance. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now, that's why discipline feels heavy to weak minds. They experience authority as oppression because they've never exercised it over themselves. Most men collapse under consistency because their discipline has no rank. It sits at the same level as emotion, desire, and impulse. When everything has equal authority, chaos runs the system. One bad night of sleep, one emotional distraction, one hit of pleasure, and discipline disappears. Authority fixes that by establishing hierarchy. Discipline sits at the top. Everything else obeys or gets ignored. This is why motivation fails long term. Motivation is emotional fuel. It burns hot and fast, then disappears. Discipline powered by authority doesn't need fuel. It runs on identity. You don't negotiate with who you are. You act in alignment with it. When discipline becomes part of your identity, skipping feels unnatural, not difficult. Authority-based discipline removes decision fatigue entirely. You don't wake up wondering whether you'll train, work, focus, or execute. The decision was made long ago. Deciding every day is weakness disguised as flexibility. Strong men remove decisions so energy can be spent on execution, not internal debate. This is where most people break. They want discipline to feel good. They want it to feel empowering, inspiring, validating. Real discipline doesn't care how it feels. It feels neutral, mechanical, boring. That's its strength. Boredom doesn't stop consistency. Emotion does. Look at any man with real control over his life. His discipline is quiet. There's no internal drama, no mental buildup, no reward fantasy. He does what needs to be done because that's the rule. Not because it excites him. Not because it aligns with his mood, because that's who he is. Authority-driven discipline also removes self-respect issues. You stop disappointing yourself because you stop promising things you won't enforce. Every completed action reinforces trust in yourself. Every enforced rule strengthens identity. Momentum becomes self-sustaining, not because it's easy, but because breaking it feels wrong. Most men fail because they try to layer discipline on top of chaos. They keep their old routines, their distractions, their weak boundaries, and then wonder why discipline collapses. Authority requires environment alignment. You remove temptations, cut access, reduce noise. Authority doesn't coexist with constant exposure to weakness. The hardest part isn't starting discipline. It's accepting that comfort loses its vote permanently. Once discipline has authority, you don't ask if you deserve rest. Rest is scheduled. You don't ask if you're tired. Tiredness is irrelevant. You don't ask if you're motivated. Motivation is optional. When discipline is authority, progress becomes predictable. Not exciting, not dramatic, predictable. And predictability is power. Power is not chaos. It's control repeated daily until results have no choice but to appear. Most men don't stay weak because they lack potential. They stay weak because they protect the version of themselves that failed. Ego is the real prison. It convinces you that who you are right now deserves loyalty, defense, patience. It tells you that change should be gentle, gradual, and respectful to your past. That belief quietly destroys your future. Ego hates exposure. It hates the idea that the current version of you is inadequate. So it reframes stagnation as stability, comfort as balance, and fear as self-awareness. You don't tell yourself you're scared. You tell yourself you're being realistic. You don't admit you're stuck. You say you're still figuring things out. Ego is sophisticated. It doesn't lie loudly. It lies intelligently. This is why growth feels offensive at first. Real growth attacks identity. It forces a brutal admission the man you've been protecting is the reason you're behind. That realization hurts more than failure ever did. Failure can be blamed on circumstances. Identity failure has nowhere to hide. Weak men respond to that pain by doubling down on ego. They defend their habits. They justify their routines. They explain their limitations. They surround themselves with people who validate the struggle instead of challenging it. Validation feels good, but it poisons progress. Strong men reject validation because it keeps the old self alive. Destroying ego doesn't mean hating yourself. It means refusing to worship your current identity. It means accepting that self-respect doesn't come from comfort, it comes from competence. And competence requires rebuilding from the ground up, not decorating what already exists. This is where most men quit internally. They say they want change, but they don't want to lose the story they tell about themselves. They want success without humiliation, growth without sacrifice, dominance without discomfort. That combination does not exist. You don't upgrade an identity. You replace it. Strong men don't negotiate with their self-image. They are willing to look stupid, inexperienced, and behind. They accept temporary inferiority in exchange for long-term superiority. Ego refuses that trade. Ego demands immediate respect without earned authority. Pay attention to how ego reacts when confronted with truth. It gets defensive, it explains, it compares, it brings up effort instead of results. The moment you hear yourself explaining instead of executing, ego is in control. And ego-controlled men always plateau. The most dangerous thing about ego is that it feels like confidence. It feels like self-belief. In reality, it's fear of being exposed as unfinished. That's why ego resists structure, discipline, and feedback. Those things threaten the illusion. Strong men dismantle that illusion deliberately. They put themselves in environments where ego dies quickly. Hard rules, clear standards, measurable outcomes, no emotional cushioning, no sympathy. That pressure strips away self-deception and leaves only reality. Reality is harsh, but it's honest. And honesty is where power is built. You don't rise by believing in yourself. You rise by becoming someone worth believing in. That requires admitting that the current version of you is not enough. Not morally, not spiritually, functionally. And once you accept that, ego no longer runs the system. Improvement does. The men who win aren't more talented. They're less attached. They don't protect who they were. They don't romanticize the struggle. They don't cling to identity for comfort. They burn it, rebuild, and move forward without nostalgia. As long as ego is protected, progress is optional. The moment ego is sacrificed, growth becomes unavoidable. Most men drown in information and call it preparation. They read, watch, listen, save, bookmark, and screenshot, then wonder why nothing changes. The truth is, uncomfortable information has never been the problem. You already know what to do. You know you should wake up earlier, train harder, focus longer, cut distractions, and stop wasting time. The reason you haven't done it has nothing to do with missing knowledge and everything to do with missing authority over your own mind. Information feels productive because it creates the illusion of movement without requiring risk. It keeps you busy while protecting you from action. Learning becomes a hiding place. You tell yourself you're getting ready, but readiness never arrives because readiness is not a feeling. It's a decision enforced through behavior. Until that happens, information just makes you more aware of your own inaction. The real shift happens when the mind is taken over, not entertained. A mental takeover means the old patterns don't get a vote anymore. The mind stops collecting ideas and starts issuing commands. This is where most men hesitate because control feels uncomfortable at first. They mistake discomfort for something being wrong, when in reality, it's the signal that something is finally changing. A mental takeover doesn't ask for permission from mood, energy, or confidence. It installs rules. Rules don't care how you feel. They exist to be followed. Once rules are in place, behavior becomes predictable. And predictability is what creates momentum, not inspiration, not excitement. Predictable execution repeated daily. Momentum is misunderstood. People think momentum comes after motivation, after confidence, after clarity. It doesn't. Momentum comes from forced action sustained long enough for resistance to die. Once momentum starts, motivation becomes irrelevant. You don't need to convince yourself to move when you're already moving. This is why waiting to feel ready is one of the most destructive habits a man can have. Readiness is a luxury weak systems require. Strong systems move regardless. When the mental takeover happens, readiness is replaced by inevitability. You don't ask if you'll act. You already know the answer. Most men fail here because they want change without loss. They want to keep their comfort, their habits, their distractions, and their excuses, while adding progress on top. That's not how transformation works. A takeover replaces leadership. The old leadership resists because it knows it's about to be removed. Once the mind is under control, momentum becomes automatic because there is no internal friction. Friction is created by debate. Debate disappears when authority is clear. Clear authority removes hesitation. Hesitation is what drains energy. Execution restores it. This is why disciplined men often look calm, while undisciplined men look stressed. Stress comes from internal conflict. Calm comes from alignment. When the mind and actions are aligned, effort feels lighter even when the work is heavy. Staying the same doesn't require effort. It requires denial. Upgrading internally requires confrontation. You confront your habits, your time usage, your avoidance, your self-talk. That confrontation is uncomfortable, but it's brief. Living stuck is far more painful, just spread out over years. Once the internal upgrade happens, life stops feeling random. Days stop slipping away unnoticed. You stop reacting and start directing. You don't need constant reminders or external pressure. The system runs itself because the leadership is clear. Nothing external changes until something internal takes control. The moment it does, progress stops being something you chase and starts being something that follows you. So here's the final truth, and you don't get to negotiate with it. You are not stuck. You are fluent in the wrong language. Change the language, and the mind reboots. Reboot the mind, and action becomes unavoidable. Keep speaking weakness internally and stay exactly where you are. Or kill the old voice, install a new one, and move forward with force. The choice is yours, but the consequences are permanent.